Live from the sun-drenched cobblestones of the Eternal City, conversations crossing faith, culture, and current events. Civil discourse, civil debate, and the free exchange of ideas. This is Intersections with Bree Dail and Joey Meugniot. And now your hosts, Bree and Joey.
Good morning from the Eternal City. This is Intersections Crossing Faith, Culture, and Current Events. This is your host, Bree Dail. I'm joined by my ever-intrepid host, Joey Meugniot. And for those of you joining us for the first time, I am the internationally accredited journalist, including accreditation to the Holy See as the Rome correspondent for the Epoch Times. You may also find me on National Catholic Register, and I will be joining Catholic Herald shortly. And I also report on other outlets. I hold a BA in history from Christendom College and a master's degree in foreign policy and diplomacy from the prestigious Norwich University. And good morning, Joey. We've got a lot on our plate today.
Good morning, Bree. Yes, we do. There's all morning is kind of jumping all over topics all over the place. So without further ado, my name is Joey Meugniot. I'm a political advisor, small business consultant, and analyst. And today, like all of our previous shows, we will be sharing with you some insights, some news, catch you up on some things that have happened over the last week and some stories that are going to be happening over this current week. I will do as we always do, and I'll kick it back over to Bree to get us started with some breaking news and some news out of the church.
So when we start to talk about, the breaking news, Joey and I have discussed how we're going to go about bringing you these topics every week. There are a lot of people who want to know what's gone on last week or over the weekend, and a lot of individuals want to hear what's coming out of the Vatican. And of course, I'm happy to provide that. But we've decided, as we continue to, formulate this show, we're looking at, crossing the faith and the culture and the current events piece. And so what we're looking at trying to do today is talk a little bit of what's coming out of the Vatican and connect that to some of the big stories breaking out of the political elements of, the United States in particular, but worldwide as well, and how that's connected to some of the cultural things that are coming out. So hopefully you will all join us for the entire show. But just starting out, some news that impacted this week. Over the weekend, a bishop out of China was arrested, including 10 seminarians and 7 of his priests. Now, his name is Bishop Chung Weiju, and he was appointed by Pope St. John Paul II in 1998 to lead an apostolic prefecture of over 100,000 faithful. That's amazing, isn't it, Joey? I mean, think about that. 100,000 Chinese faithful who were in the underground church. This was a bishop whose hands and head were anointed by John Paul II in 1998. So he's older. He was arrested. He was arrested because he's part of what is known as the underground church, a church that is still in conversation with this new patriotic church that has now been brought into the fold, according to the Sino-Vatican deal. However, the Chinese seem to not be uplifting their end of the bargain with the, whatever that bargain is, because we're really not sure of the details behind the Sino-Vatican deal. But there is still persecution going on, and heavy persecution. And so this bishop has now been, unfortunately, arrested. And Joey, I want to read a quick quote from the one of the Italian outlets that covered this week. And unfortunately, we haven't had much in the way of coverage in the United States. I am going to try to do a piece on this, or not. I'll combine it to a piece that I'm submitting for Epoch Times. But there's a Chinese priest who's part of this underground church, and he had to speak with an anonymous name because, he's just as likely for him to be arrested as his bishop. He said, "We are very bitter," explains a Chinese priest from Zhejiang Prefecture who asked to remain anonymous for security reasons. There is an ongoing dialogue between the Vatican and the government, and trying to break faith in Jesus Christ in this violent way, I believe, is the opposite of what Pope Francis and the Vatican authorities who worked on negotiations ask and desire. The Chinese authorities should somehow find mediation rather than employ police platoons if they were fighting criminals. This is persecution. And, this is connected to another story that was coming out over the weekend. Pope Francis has appointed Father Peter Chow as the Bishop of Hong Kong. And I do have some exclusive comments from Cardinal Zen and a diocesan insider showing some of the political machinations that are happening in Hong Kong and what has gone on over the last 2 years when they've been trying to figure out who is going to be the next Bishop of Hong Kong. So, Joey, before we go into that, I would like to get your thoughts on, Chinese persecution, the ongoing persecution. Pope Francis came out over the weekend on Sunday and actually asked for a global prayer for the Chinese church. And this is in union with a call from Myanmar's Cardinal Bo, who asked for a global prayer for China. What are your thoughts?
So it's nice to hear the Pope say the word China. That's
Right.
That's kind of a big deal and a move in the right direction. At least we know that he knows how to say it now. So progress, I guess we can always chalk that up as a W for the good guys. So he knows how to say it. So if he's asked about it, he shouldn't act surprised anymore, because we now know that he knows that China is a real place that has real people that have real problems.
Oh my.
So I think that there's silver lining to that, is that, he did call for it. He did talk about it, which is a step in the right direction. There's a lot of still unanswered questions. And with the other initiative, this mixed with the other initiative that they've got lately with climate change and a few of the other topics that are coming out and that they're kind of revolving the Vatican around, I'm surprised that he elected to do this. It's nice that he did, but I'm surprised that he did. With that being said, I'm curious to see if it goes any further than this, if there's any additional dialogue, or if there's any other mention of any of the other things that are going on there.
I mean, especially because we have a successor of the apostles currently in jail, and there are others who've disappeared in Chinese gulag, and no mention of that. I certainly, it'll be interesting if he says anything more, especially because this entire week is dedicated to global prayer for China.
I mean, there's not a lot that he says about Christian persecution outside of when the Vatican can get publicity for it. I mean, there's a lot of Christian persecution going on around the world and a lot of silence out of the Vatican. I mean, there's things that are happening. I read some headlines the other day that said, priests being arrested, they're clamping down on worship, they're fining people for trying to worship and holding hands and hugging. And this was Canada, not China. So that was the reason why I was a little concerned about it, is that all of those headlines, I assumed were going to be about China, but they weren't. They're actually about Canada. And so while we look at China, and there's a lot of things going on in China, he doesn't talk about Christian persecution really going on anywhere. I mean, there's things going on in the Holy Land right now where there's Christians being persecuted there as well that are in the midst of everything, and we don't talk about that. He doesn't talk about a lot of things unless it's.
Well, there was a discussion, Joey. There were Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Secretariat of State of the Vatican, came out last week and said that the Vatican maintains its standing, and it's been quite a few years. I was actually surprised. I wasn't aware that the Vatican has always tried to maintain the standing of encouraging a two-state solution out of the situation with the Palestinian and the Israelis. And yet we are seeing, and we'll talk a little bit about this later, today, just an hour ago, the Ayatollah of Iran has come out and actually has tweeted his support of Hamas, cleansing the how did he say it, Joey? It was cleansing the corruption of the usurpers from the Holy Land, I believe. Correct?
Yes, let me pull up the tweet that he said.
Yeah, I tweeted it out too.
Purify the Holy Land from the contamination of the usurpers is the exact words.
Right,
so,
that's right.
It's nice that he can say things like this on Twitter, but former President Trump can't say things at all on social media. So
Right, and we'll go further into that because he actually supports the jihad against the Israelis, and of course, the minority Christians are majority. I don't know if I can say this actually. The minority of Christians in and around Israel are from the Palestinian side, and so they're kind of caught in the middle between Israel and Palestine, and they're usually used as kind of the go-between.
call it what it really is. They're
in
human shields
communication.
largely.
Yeah.
And I think you're kind of put the nail on the head. They're a minority, but a majority of them are from Palestine. Is kind of the direction that was going in. Yeah. So it's pretty crazy that's it gets overlooked a lot, and we don't talk about it. And it's very difficult to even put anything out on social media, especially if you're a Christian or a conservative. You can't say very many things without getting canceled or banned or deleted somehow for saying some of these
Which
things.
is actually really interesting. That point is really interesting because we're going to go to break in a few minutes, and when we come back, we're going to talk more about this particular tweet because it just happened about an hour ago. But Joey, when you say you can't go out on social media, you can't say these things, you can be canceled, right? One of the big things that I'm watching right now coming out of China, and I had said this before, is the appointment of this new Chinese bishop who will be taking the see of Hong Kong. Why is it so important? Is because Hong Kong being seen as the kind of the free state of China, and really where China is really, it's the front lines where China is really trying to take over the system of government. It has had such a pushback by mostly Christians, but it really doesn't matter. Any free-loving people are going to be pushing back against dictatorship. And we have seen that happen in Hong Kong. And much of the leadership are from the Catholic communities in and around Hong Kong. And so, it's taken 2 years, Joey, for the Pope to choose a successor in that see. And, Cardinal Zen, we've talked about this many times, Cardinal Zen is very, very, very outspoken against how the CCP is trying to infiltrate the church in China. And unfortunately, he was never consulted with regards to the Sino-Vatican deal. Another thing that is very concerning is that for the last 2 years, there's been a lot of politicking behind the scenes in Hong Kong to try to push an individual, and his name is Father Choi, to becoming the Bishop of Hong Kong. And his background is that he is a favorite of the CCP. He was actually supported by Cardinal Ho, who was standing kind of in as the Bishop of Hong Kong. So there's a lot of machinations behind the scenes. From what I've been told by an insider in the diocese is that Father Choi, in order to try to politic, has placed certain individuals that were part of his camp in certain leadership roles, including in the press, in the Chinese Catholic press or the Hong Kong Catholic press. And so now this announcement of a Jesuit who was kind of off the radar has been placed in this position. And this Jesuit, it seems to be very into the educational realm. He has been one to seem to walk the fence. He wants diplomacy. He's okay with people, going and attending the Tiananmen Square demonstrations, but as long as they're following the law. And the Hong Kong law has said, no, you can't do it. So what does that really mean, Joey? I mean, what do you think? Do you think you can dialogue with the CCP?
History has said that you can't. So I'm going to go ahead and say no. It's largely their way or the highway, or they just block you and ban you from even competing in their marketplaces or socially and culturally or politically there. And so that's no.
So there's
a
pattern.
You can't.
There's a pattern.
There's
a
historical evidence and a pattern that suggests that you can. So I know that we're coming up on our first break. After we get back from the break, we've got a little bit more news on China, some other additional reports from the Wall Street Journal, and some follow-ups to some stories and things we talked about. It seems like a few weeks ago. It could have been a few years at this point. I feel like we're running in dog years. So stick around, stay tuned. We're going to continue our conversation after the break. We've got a lot more news and exciting things to talk about. And then we've got another little tidbit and a chat to have about The Chosen, which I know Bree's excited to talk about again. We've talked about it once before. So after we get back, we will be continuing this conversation, continuing our dialogue live from Rome. So we will talk to you on the flip side of this break. Thank you for listening.
Whenever Christians judge some behavior to be immoral, we're often hit with Matthew 7:1, where Jesus says, "Judge not, that you be not judged." But this is a misreading of the text, because just a few verses later in verse 5, he gives us precise instruction on how to judge. He says, first, take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. Jesus, therefore, is not saying that we can't judge a behavior to be immoral. His point is that we need to have a forgiving and merciful attitude toward others as God has toward us. And when we do judge a behavior to be wrong and encourage our brother to avoid it, we need to make sure that we're first a credible witness living an upright life. I'm Carlo Broussard with the Ready Reason for Catholic Answers, Catholic.com.
Looking for a Catholic university where the greatest works of Western and Catholic tradition are the foundation for learning, all in an environment that is faithful to the magisterium? Recommended by the Cardinal Newman Society, the University of Dallas offers an exceptional liberal arts education, preserving the wisdom of the past while preparing students for world-changing futures. Academically excellent, always faithful. Apply today at udallas.edu.
Welcome back to Intersections with Bree Dail and Joey Meugniot. I am your co-host to Bree, Joey Meugniot. See, I can get names right too. It works out. We rehearse well, just like we drew it up in rehearsal. So before we left, we were talking about some stories out of China, and we'll get back to China shortly. But there were a few interesting news pieces that I found over the last few days and over the weekend. One was that, and they both revolve around California, so this should be interesting. But one of the things I found really interesting is that corporations and companies are starting to tell the government, so specifically in San Francisco, Walgreens told the government in San Francisco they were going to have to close 17 stores because theft had gotten so high that it was no longer viable for them to run the businesses and keep the stores open. So and the reason why I think this is important, there's a lot of nuances to this, but realistically, in the United States, a lot of the pharmacies and a lot of CVS's and Walgreens and those are where people are going to get their vaccines. So if you choose to get a vaccine, well, now in San Francisco, because of the defunding the police movement and a lot of some of these more leftist policies that are going on in San Francisco, should you even choose that you want to get it, you can't now because there's 17 fewer locations there, and it's all because of some of the policies that Gavin Newsom had implemented over the last few years. So weak on crime is starting to hurt businesses and starting to hurt average everyday Americans who won't be able to pick up their medicines, their medications, get the things that they need that they would normally get from Walgreens. And I think that's a shame that we've gotten that far.
Yeah, Joey, and another story out of California that I thought was really interesting that you sent to me was that Gavin Newsom has once again lost in the courts. And this time he has to pay, I think, $1.3 million in legal fees after shutting down some churches during COVID. And we're seeing this as a pattern. And it's when we choose to, on the one hand, rules are for thee and not for me. And then on the other hand, in try to cater to a mob. What you end up doing is that you don't see the means between these extremes. So we see in San Francisco this aspect of and I've seen some videos. I'm not sure, Joey, you saw some videos. There were some videos that went viral over the weekend out of California too. Some of the beaches there in California have now just been overrun with individuals with drug abuse issues, and you are seeing videos of just violence and all hours of the night. And again, this is because the police are not necessary, right? We need to have more dialogue with people involved with these situations. And it's interesting we have that on that side, but at the same time, we can't, we can't worship in California. The place where people could need the healing, need the support, that was shut down. What were your thoughts on that story out of California with Newsom?
So I'm glad that there's a drop up another W for the day for the good guys here, but it was unconstitutional when he did it. It shouldn't have happened in the first place. It was pretty clear that it was unconstitutional, and it was incredibly biased as well. At the time, you had massive chain stores, and they were protesting in the streets. All these other things were okay, but going to religious services wasn't. And so, it's a good thing that at least we've got some semblance of checks and balances and order to our government in an otherwise disorderly and chaotic situations going on politically in the United States. So, I'm glad to see that at least there's someone being held accountable, especially for his poor decisions in the state of California. Moreover, though, I think that there's a lot that left to be desired with that. And when you look at drug use and depression and a lot of these things, I remember talking about this. We weren't on the radio at the time, but I remember talking about this a year ago. There's going to be a lot of unseen. There's that which is seen and that which is unseen. And one of the unseen costs and one of the ramifications for a lot of these lockdowns is that depression and drug use and physical abuse has gone through the roof. You're seeing record numbers of child abuse cases. You're seeing record numbers of ODs. And in fact, I think it was in San Francisco, definitely California for sure. I'm pretty sure it was in San Francisco. There were more drug overdose deaths than there were COVID deaths in 2020. So
mental health has become such a huge issue too. Like I think there was a story out today that child or female, especially in females, but child eating disorders has skyrocketed in the last 2 years. In particular, last year with the lockdown, we're talking anything from anorexia to bulimia, and that speaks to an underlying element of real depression.
I think the
isolation.
The misnomer here of calling it public health, it's not. It's public control. There's not anything health related to any of this because there's absolutely no consideration for mental health. And then they're trying now to encourage everyone to get vaccines by offering them hamburgers, pizza, and French fries and donuts. Like, I thought this was about health. We were supposed to be, this is a public health crisis. So is obesity. Obesity is a public health crisis. Obesity kills more Americans every year than COVID will or ever has. Heart disease, all of these things that come for this. But this is why they're trying to, and now they're using a lottery system, like trying to encourage people with lottery winnings to get. So is this really about public health? There's absolutely no talk about mental health.
And there's two areas that you've hit. Like you've hit on one end, the leadership side, right? The leadership side, that rules are for thee, not for me kind of thing. We'll talk about that because there are other stories out of that. But then we've got also the control and also the health crisis because we are not, you and I, we've said this from the beginning, the virus is real. It's obvious it's real. The mutation of the virus is real. And in fact, Joey, we had a story that came out of the Wall Street Journal over the weekend that says that there's intelligence now that there were individuals in the Wuhan lab. You remember that story was discredited, wasn't it? But there were individuals, 3 researchers from the China Wuhan Institute of Virology became sick enough in November 2019 that they sought hospital care, according to a previous undisclosed U.S. intelligence report that could add weight to growing calls for further probe into whether the COVID-19 virus may have escaped from the laboratory. Now, Joey, last year, this was reported that there was a connection to the NIH and studies on the COVID virus. The NIH, whereupon, it sent money and researchers on the COVID virus. And if everybody knows, like the NIH, you have in this National Institute for Health, underlying or like a kind of subsection of that is Anthony Fauci's like main focus area, which is he's the head of the department focusing on AIDS. And he was involved with that research. And this is documented. This is not conspiracy theory here, and this is something that happens quite a bit where there are different labs that are heading in different areas as studying. But what the question was this Wuhan laboratory a CCP military medical institute?
Well,
and yeah, go ahead.
Well, so outside of like some of the unanswered questions that we just don't have, there's a lot of things we don't know. But what we do know, and this isn't us, I'm reading off the Wall Street Journal, and there was some testimony given before the U.S. Senate last week, 2 weeks ago now. Some really good back and forth between Senator Rand Paul and Dr. Fauci.
And how,
there is a monetary link between the lab and the U.S. government where we gave them money. That's unequivocal. Like, can't argue that. It's public testimony. It's not. There's documents, paperwork, and funding documents that go back and forth explaining all this. It's not a conspiracy. This actually happened. So that part of the story is unequivocal. Now, what they're looking at now is really when did they know and what did they know. So we've been trying to get these answers for a long time, but the Chinese government has largely been dragging their feet with the support of the World Health Organization. So the organization that would normally look into these things has been co-opted into kind of covering some of them up. And the reason I thought this story was interesting is because about this time last year, because we live overseas, so we see and get news from different sources, things that you wouldn't normally see. And one of the things I remember seeing, and I thought it was kind of odd at the time, was that at the same time that the Chinese government was trying to say that the United States military was responsible for and the U.S. military brought it to China, and that's why it happened. They also ran stories in Spain and Italy at the same time saying very similar things, that the virus came from Spain and Italy, and it wasn't China. China was not to blame for it. So this is, 18 months of a PR campaign run by the Chinese Communist Party to try and point blame or diffuse the blame into other entities and other organizations. And the thing that we really don't know, because they cover it up and they won't talk about it, is when did they actually see the first cases of COVID? It could have been as early as the summer of 2019. But the fact that they're pointing fingers at other people is really what kind of makes me even more curious as to what's going on.
And they pushed out like disinformation, like videos on Twitter early last year. We're talking around January timeframe, or it would have been January 2019. And I called it out then. You can look at that historically. Like, I called it out then that there was disinformation that was being pushed out and very bad propaganda, and that actually said to me, this is bad. This is really bad, because the Chinese are they're just masters in propaganda. And the fact that they put out this just ridiculous propaganda, some older people saying, we're not afraid, we're not going to wear masks, peace out, like, acting very happy and like, everything's normal. That was, to me, that scared me more than any other kind of propaganda the Chinese can push out, is really badly made propaganda that says everything's okay, guys, and here's another thing. So the Wall Street Journal came out with that article, right? Cardinal Zen over the weekend tweeted out another article that said, that came from the Globe in the Mail. And it said, scientists working at Canada's highest security infectious disease laboratory have been collaborating with the Chinese military researchers to study and conduct experiments on deadly pathogens. 7 scientists within the Specialist Pathogen Unit at the National Microbiology Laboratory, or NML, in Winnipeg, and Chinese military researchers have conducted experiments and co-authored 6 studies on infectious diseases such as Ebola, Lassa fever, and Rift Valley fever. The publication dates of these studies range from early 2016 to early 2020. Now, here's what's interesting. When Cardinal Zen posted that, it triggered something in my mind, because I remembered that there was a story about the same laboratory in 2019. And here is what is interesting. Okay, this came out of Science magazine. Mystery surrounds ouster of Chinese researchers from Canadian laboratory. This is by Brian Owens, July 19th, 2019. So July. So this is before we hear that there were individuals in the Wuhan lab who were sick by a few months, right? Canadian researchers are reacting with puzzlement to the news that a policy breach, has caused the nation's only high contaminant disease laboratory to bar a prominent Chinese Canadian biologist, her biologist husband, and a number of students from the faculty. So it's the same National Microbiology Laboratory in Winnipeg. Okay, and then that triggered another story that came out about a few months later, Tuesday, January 28th, 2020. Harvard University professor and 2 Chinese nationals charged in 3 separate China-related cases. Do you remember hearing about this? The Harvard professor who was making money off of selling research to China.
Well, it's espionage is what that's called.
That's espionage, right? So now we see, and what is it?
Selling your research doesn't sound bad until you call it what it really is, which is
but Joey,
espionage.
This is what's crazy about it. A Chinese national was arrested December 10th, 2019 at Boston's Logan International Airport and charged by criminal complaint with attempting to smuggle, get this, 21 vials of biological research into China. So I just find this very interesting. And that was, here we go, the principal investigator at the Lieber Research Group was Dr. Lieber at Harvard University, which specializes in the area of nanoscience, has received more than $15 million in grants funding from the National Institutes of Health and the Department of Defense. And this, Lieber became a strategic scientist at the Wuhan University of Technology. So I do think that's really interesting that we've got these stories that came out of 2020, 2019, and now we've got new stories coming out of the same individuals or connections. I find it very interesting. I don't see this as coincidence. I think we have a lot more information now starting to come out about the the original thoughts early on with regards to the Wuhan laboratory and its connections. And it's sticky and it's messy because it may also involve monies that were being sent over to and collaboration by Western scientists. So that, Joey, was a pretty big story, I think, coming out and unfortunately, again, underreported.
Well, I think there's a lot of things that get underreported. And to be perfectly clear, before we get copy strikes or warnings or smacks on the hand or anything, these are stories that you can go look up yourself, and they're from reputable sources. I mean, it's like the Wall Street Journal is not exactly, a crazy conspiracy theory portal, right? So, and some of these, like even the New York Times is starting to report on some of these. So is the LA Times, which aren't exactly conservative strongholds for, strongholds for conservative thought. So this isn't like some ideological, rewriting of history. These are stories that are just being out there that they kind of put out and then just sweep them away so you don't really pay attention to them. They don't get the attention that some of the other stories do. But what's interesting about all of this is that we just don't know enough, right? We have tidbits and pieces and parts of a bunch of little stories that you're like, well, that's kind of weird. That doesn't really make sense. Well, that's a little weird. Well, and we have all these on the other hands, and that's, on the other hand and on the other hand and on the other hand, you keep thinking like, okay, well, something doesn't quite sound right here. Then, it's bad when even the fact checkers, PolitiFact and some of these fact check places that got people banned off social media for even saying some of these things have now come back around and said, actually,
that might be true.
That might be true. So, and there's dozens, maybe hundreds of conservatives that were questioning these things a year ago that now even the legacy media organizations are saying that, what, hey, there could be something to this story. Are those people going to be unbanned now? I doubt it.
And yeah, and the question also has to be like, unfortunately, we see on the left the banning and saying, hey, anybody who's questioning the virus, anybody who's questioning how quickly people are being administered, and also the kind of the forcing of the vaccine, At the other side, we've got people who say in no way, shape, or form is the virus real, and that the vaccine is implanting chips to control people. Do you know, like the polarization of constructive dialogue, constructive thinking, critical thinking. That's going to continue if we cannot come to the realization that facts have not been forthcoming from China. And that should be the first indication that China recognizes their responsibility in this, even though they don't want to recognize it. And that there are millions of people who have suffered now, either suffered losses or suffered themselves from COVID, that aren't going to get restitution as we continue to try to pass the ball and pass the buck on, conservative thought or liberal thought, or you're shutting people down and saying that using virtue signaling as a way of being able to say, like, you were right, and everybody else is wrong. It's a problem when we see that, because then while we're arguing, we have the abuse of power taking place. So we spoke about Governor Newsom and some of the abuses of power there. I mean, we can talk about what's happened in New York, and we have. But, Joey, another story out this week. Governor Whitmer, and this is coming from the Washington Post. You sent me this article from WAPO, which is known to be extremely left-leaning, WAPO is reporting that Whitmer was caught at a dinner party. Now, Governor Whitmer is known for her extreme stances on social distancing and shutdowns. And I mean, Joey, what were your thoughts when you read this morning? And she came out and she said, what? She's just human and she made a mistake.
Yeah. Okay. You're only upset, and your only mistake is that you got caught, really, because you don't feel bad about it. It's just like when Governor Newsom got, or as I like to call him, Mussolini, he got caught at a French Laundry restaurant. It's a very expensive, high, like upscale restaurant in California near San Francisco. But what happened is that one of the friends at the party took a picture and posted it on Facebook and then quickly deleted it. But the internet is forever. So
yes. It always remembers.
Right. So it always remembers. Yeah. You can't escape the internet. So what happened is that picture that went viral, and she looks ridiculous because she's telling in public with a straight face, she's telling the people of Michigan that they need to wear masks and socially distance, and we can't go to school, and you have to close your businesses, and you have to be relying on the state for your income, and we need to spend more money, and there needs to be more control, and they need to do all of these things while crime's rising in Detroit. There's still people that don't have clean water in Flint, and nope, got to lock it down. But that's great. Good for you guys, but I'm going to go over here and not do any of that stuff. So, and I think we need to call out politicians to do this, whether they're left or right or somewhere in the middle. I think it's ridiculous. Like, it's the
Fauci has done it too, right? We saw him take off the mask in front of the television after he thought
he takes his mask off all the time. As soon as the camera stopped rolling, Dr. Fauci takes his mask off. It's why he's so contradictory, because he can't make up his mind. It just depends on what he's feeling that day and decides what he wants to say. That's why Americans are confused. That's why the world is confused, and that's why people are upset, is because we don't really know what to think anymore. They're always like, trust the science, but the science changes, like Dr. Fauci changes his socks. Like, it just depends on what they want to do and what they want to accomplish and what their narrative is for the day. And that's the really frustrating part for most Americans, is we really just don't understand what we should be doing. Like, who do we believe? Who do we listen to? First it was don't wear masks, then it was wear masks, then it was don't wear masks, then it was wear 2 masks, then it was don't wear any masks. It doesn't really matter. Then it was get a vaccine, then it was don't get a vaccine, then it was get a vaccine but still wear a mask, then it was you can go inside and take off your mask because there's no threat, but now it's wear your mask but you're inside, then it's wear your mask after 6 o'clock but not before. Like, what? How do you,
right.
I mean, that was just me rattling off what I could think of off the top of my head. And I know that a lot of people are like, that sounds about like what I heard too. Everybody heard this. Everybody in the world hears this. And it's not just an exclusively American problem. I mean, these are things that,
here in Italy.
What has just literally every country in the world. Like, oh, it's really great that the British now can hug and hold hands. Like, what?
Yes. Or in Italy, we can stay out and eat out now until 11. Our
from 10 o'clock
10.
to 11 o'clock, so that extra hour. And now, well, I will say I much prefer 11 versus 10 o'clock, but like an hour, really? That's the, okay. All right, okay.
How about freedom?
I mean,
how about staying out until like 4:30 in the morning if we wanted to on a weekday?
But it's ridiculous that it's even, it's ridiculous that it's even a thing, right? And so in the United States, you get a lot of businesses that are starting to reopen, and people aren't having to wear masks. We can wear masks in indoor dining, and some of these things are starting to come back. But it makes me think that, for the next time this happens, what are we putting in place that's going to stop some of these things that we've seen? Like what changes are we making to our republic that will keep these things from happening again? Not that we shouldn't take public health seriously. I think we should take public health very seriously, but actual public health, the things that are actually impacting the health of the public,
Right, like
not
factual.
the perceived, not the perceived threat, but the actual
So what
threat.
are your
And some of
what
these
are your
things that-
recommendations? What do you think, though, Joey? Because
well,
I think people are interested in something like that. What would be the recommendations in the 3 minutes we have remaining until break?
So there's a few things. I think some of the states are getting it right when they're limiting the executive power and emergency powers that the state or that the governors can have, right? And they're putting limitations in place that say if you want it to last more than 30 days, you have to get the approval of the legislature, and there's actually has to be some permanent changes or like a temporary bill or something like that where there has to be approval of the legislature, because a lot of these governors just executive decree, we're now in charge and this is what's going to happen whether you like it or not, and it's all under the guise of public safety. And so there's that's at a state level. So your local, and I mean, look at some of the cities and some of the states that these are happening in, and some of the cities are trying to overrule some of the governors and saying, hey, that's cool, you can do what you want to, but we're going to go over here and not wear masks because there's no point for us to wear masks in the city anymore. So we need to have as a country, on the local and state level, some of these conversations need to happen. Additionally, Congress of the United States needs to have some real serious conversations about executive overreach. I know they're not going to because one party controls all the facets of government right now, but eventually they won't. And some more checks and balances, some speed bumps, some handbrakes, something's got to happen here, so it's not just forever, ever, and ever, and perpetuity. And I know we're coming up on our break time, so when we come back, I really think we should talk about some of the semi-permanent changes that were coming to the Capitol. Some people that decided that they were going home now. And I think there's going to be a lot of changes over the next few weeks and hopefully a few years to where we can eliminate or put in place some checks and balances, some better checks and balances to the great overreach that there is from governments right now. And it attacks all aspects of our life. So whether it's religious liberties, civil liberties, your taxes, your way of life, what you want your kids to be taught in schools, how you want to go to school, all of these things are really important. And I think that's kind of the dialogue and the direction that we need to be going. And in some states, and some people are already starting this, but I think more the better. So when we come back, I know that we've got a few more topics for you to round it out and try to end on some positive news, or at least some good news when we come back. And I think that's going to about do it for us before we head to the break. So this is Intersections. We are we've been talking about China, we've been talking about some of the lockdowns in the United States, and when we come back, we will finish out some of those topics and get you some good news before we sign off for the week.
Some time back, I had a chat with some Jehovah's Witness ladies, and they made the assertion that the first Christians didn't believe Jesus was God. That belief was a later invention. But is this true? No, it's not. Leaving John 1:1 off to the side for now due to disputes with Jehovah's Witnesses over its translation, John 20:28 records the Apostle Thomas saying to Jesus, which literally translates from the Greek, "the Lord of me and the God of me." John says of Jesus in 1 John 5:20, "This is the true God and eternal life." Paul writes of Jesus in Colossians 2:9, "For in him the whole fullness of deity dwells bodily." It doesn't get any clearer than that. There are many more passages, but these suffice to show that the first Christians did believe that Jesus was God. I'm Carlo Broussard with a ready reason for Catholic Answers, Catholic.com.
Looking for a Catholic university where the greatest works of Western and Catholic tradition are the foundation for learning, all in an environment that is faithful to the magisterium? Recommended by the Cardinal Newman Society, the University of Dallas offers an exceptional liberal arts education. preserving the wisdom of the past while preparing students for world-changing futures. Academically excellent, always faithful. Apply today at udallas.edu.
Welcome back to Intersections with Bree Dail and Joey Meugniot. Before the break, we were kind of went on a little bit of a tangent there, and we'll get back to that tangent in a second. But for the last hour or so, we've been talking about China. We talked a lot about China, actually. Some of the COVID response and the origins. We've talked about some of the lockdowns and some of the ramifications of the lockdowns that we've seen and will continue to see over the foreseeable future. And then we moved a little bit into government overreach and kind of how this is all panning out at the federal level. And I think there's definitely some interesting conversation to be had. But Bree, I know that one of the stories that we had talked about slightly before the show was two things that are happening. One is that Congress just spent another $2 billion on Fort Pelosi, as we'll call it. So that's the complex, the congressional, like the Capitol Hill complex. So Fort Pelosi. Yeah. And then the other thing that I found interesting is that the 2,000, I think the remaining 2,000, or there's about 2,000 troops that are leaving the Capitol. So National Guard are finally going home after nearly 6 months of being at the Capitol on the Capitol security mission, if you will. So those are the two big stories that I kind of thought, and then we can start talking about some more cultural and hopefully end on some positive notes.
One of the things that I would just ask for those of us who are in the press when we are reporting on what happened at the Capitol, let's just be honest here. There was no Capitol siege. Again, there was no Capitol siege. There was potential. There was potential violence at the Capitol. But the effects, the reporting on the facts, it doesn't add up to what actually took place. We had thousands of troops surrounding the Capitol, sleeping in the garages, not receiving, even basic food. And for what? The question of the American people should be today, what are we footing that bill for? Who made that authorization? Joey and I were talking about this beforehand. This is something that I have a passion for, having been an active duty military officer and who has had to serve during extended periods of executive order and certain situations in deployment. And the question has to be, because the executive officer, the president, is over the Department of Defense. When we have situations like war, you have to have a declaration of war, correct, Joey? I mean, this is constitutional.
If there's an actual war, but there's about 1 million ways to move around that particular. Yeah. So.
Right,
yes,
and the budget of the Department of Defense, as we know, has been severely impacted in the last few years. We've had continuing resolutions, but the budget of the Department of Defense has been impacted. And we have seen on the one side our President Trump trying to bring home troops from Afghanistan, and then we see a threat, a proposed threat at the Capitol, whereupon we had a state of emergency and not a state in the Washington D.C. And after all of that took place, we saw a continuance of the need of the Capitol Police, of National Guard troops. So my question, I think, would be, if I was back in Washington, D.C. as an investigative reporter, would be who authorized this at the end of the day? Whose signature is on the documents that funded this continued presence? Because that's a lot of money. Joey, did you figure out how much money was spent on National Guard troops?
I mean,
were you able to find that?
No, not a specific amount, but I mean, it's about, I would say conservatively, about like $3,500 a month per soldier. So times the 10 or 20,000 that were there, times 5 months. I mean, it's a lot. So and I mean, we spent a lot more money on a lot more things than just that. I mean, Congress has never met a spending bill that they didn't like. So the money isn't. Well, the money is interesting, and that's usually where people gets people into trouble. I'm curious, and I don't think we're ever going to find an answer. So let me just Tarantino the ending for you. I don't think we're ever going to get an answer on who ordered what and when and who authorized this. I don't think we're ever going to get an answer. So we know that the Capitol Hill,
Is
like
that
the
because
Capitol
we
Hill
don't have
police,
the
had asked things, and I think that's the problem. That's the real story: is who authorized it and when did they authorize it? That's the real story, not necessarily the money. And I don't think we're going to get an answer to that. I know the Capitol Hill police asked for help. They went to the DOD. The DOD, there was some back and forth between the White House and the DOD, and then Congress, and then Congress got involved and said no, and then yes, and then no. I don't know that we're ever going to get a real answer to that question. And I think there's a lot of things that we still don't have good answers for. Like, and I know that the family of Ashley Babbitt still wants answers. So I know there's a lot of things that we want answers on, and that the American people deserve answers on. But I don't know that we're going to get them, and I don't know that we're going to get them anytime soon. So if we do get them, it will be a long time from now when the political ramifications and those involved are no longer in office or around. That's when we'll get answers.
Right.
So we deserve answers now, but my professional opinion is that we are not going to get those answers anytime soon.
So with the thousands of National Guard troops, actually, you had mentioned another story. Why don't you talk a little bit about that Fort Pelosi?
So, congressional Democrats have been trying to beef up security at the behest of some former generals and this commission that they've got going on, trying to make the U.S. Capitol complex more secure, permanent fencing. A rapid reaction force, things like that. Should something like that happen? So it really, and if you look at, so another story that's going on. I don't want to get to the good news because we're running out of time here. But there, one of the interesting things is that the more video that comes out about January 6th, the more people are like, wait a minute. I mean, the video that came out over the weekend was a lot of the what they want to call insurrectionists, what we're going to call, I don't know, protesters, is one man's protesters, another man's insurrectionist, I think is how the saying goes.
Right.
So, but they were taking selfies with the police. I mean, there are aspects where things were violent and things happen, but there's a lot more video evidence of nothing, of nothing, of them standing in line and walking through the Capitol building and cleaning up the trash after they left. So, but these aren't really great stories. They don't make a lot of great headlines for legacy media. So anyway, so they've agreed to spend a lot more money on securing the Capitol Hill complex. So just more of your tax dollars going to things that probably don't need to be invested in. And they'll justify all of it by raising your taxes anyway. So that's kind of the bottom line up front for that whole initiative, for that whole conversation. So with that being said, Bree, I know you had a couple good news stories. I know we wanted to talk about The Chosen. So let's talk about The Chosen and give us some updates.
Yay. Okay, so for transparency, for those of you who know me, you know that I have covered extensively and exclusively for National Catholic Register up until, this month, I guess, doing stories on Jonathan Rumi, Dallas Jenkins, The Chosen. And this past week, or in the last few weeks, there have been episodes that have caused some controversy with the very, very traditional groups within the Catholic Church. I'm not going to go into that. I'm happy to have conversations and direct messages and whatnot on my own opinion on that. Let's just say, though, that just reminder that Dallas Jenkins is Protestant, and we are praying for all people to come to love Our Lady, for example. And I'm not sure if the way to bring about a love for Our Lady is to beat someone over the head with doctrine and criticisms, because what that does is cause someone to become defensive, and then you've got people in corners. And Dallas, the person that I know in Dallas Jenkins and the person that I know in Jonathan Rumi, and I've gotten to know through my work with them, have been very, very open, very prayerful, very desirous of the will of God. And I think we have to keep praying for them because there are thousands and thousands of people coming to belief in Christ through this work. And Jonathan in particular has been saying the Rosary and Divine Mercy Chaplet And Protestants have started to say the Rosary and Divine Mercy Chaplet with Dallas. So last night premiered The Chosen, episode 5. And this caused some more controversy because some people just don't like how they portray the crazy John the Baptist or crazy John in the show. But I found one particular part of the episode really powerful. It is Mary Magdalene confronting a demoniac. And in the show, she also had to suffer spiritual warfare. So she's confronting it, and she's afraid. And then we see Simon the Zealot confront, and he's also defeated. And then you just see Jesus walk up and pretty much throw the demon out of them. So we're going to show that right now. Adrian, if you could throw that up.
Smell! It's on all of you!
What did your mother call you?
Can't say.
Please say your name.
Please. Out of him! Yeah!
And on that,
And that has it
here
for this week.
Yeah, I think that's about all the time we have today. We'll put a link to that video down below so you can see it. If you are listening on the radio, I know it's a little hard to understand what's going on there. But thank you for listening. We will put links to this and a few other stories down below. Leave us comments, suggestions, thoughts. Thank you for listening. It's been a great show, great week. We appreciate you listening. And we will be back at the same bat time, same bat channel next week. And we look forward to talking to you again next week.
God bless.